Claire Weston's life looked ordinary from the outside, quiet, maybe even peaceful. But inside, she carried a silence that had weight. It had been 2 years since her husband Daniel passed away, and even though everyone told her time would heal, time hadn't done much except make the world quieter. She still lived in their small apartment in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by reminders of what once was framed photos, half-read books, the piano they used to play together. Every morning, Claire would make herself a single cup of coffee, open the curtains, and let the sunlight touch the dust floating in the air. Then, almost like a ritual, she'd sit at the piano. Her fingers would hover over the keys, hesitant, before pressing down gently. The music she played was soft, mournful, and honest. It was the language she used to speak to Daniel, the only way she knew how to keep him close. Her students adored her kindness. She taught children and adults, anyone who wanted to learn, but lately she'd stopped taking new students. It felt too heavy to open herself up to new faces, new stories. But one spring afternoon, something or someone changed. It was a Thursday when a tall man walked into her studio holding the hand of a young teenage girl. The girl was shy, maybe 14, with long brown hair and a nervous smile. The man introduced himself as Evan Carter, an architect who had recently moved into the neighborhood. His daughter Emily wanted to learn piano. Claire greeted them with her usual warmth, though her heart beat a little faster than usual. There was something about the man, not in the way of attraction, but familiarity. His eyes carried the same kind of quiet sadness she'd seen in her own mirror during the lesson. Claire noticed Evan sitting silently by the door, watching his daughter play. Most parents scrolled through their phones or left early, but he didn't. He sat still, listening as if every note mattered. When Emily finished, he stood and smiled. "You're very patient," he told Claire. "Your music feels peaceful." She smiled back, slightly embarrassed. "It's my therapy, I guess." He nodded. "I understand that." And with those 3 words, she knew he did. Over the next few weeks, Emily's lessons became a rhythm Claire looked forward to. Evan always came early and stayed late. Sometimes they'd talk about little things, music, work, the strange weather. Other times, they'd sit in comfortable silence. It was easy, natural, and somehow comforting. One rainy evening, Emily didn't come. Evan arrived alone. "She's not feeling well," he said, "but she told me to come anyway, to pay for the lesson." Claire laughed softly. "That's very responsible of her." He hesitated before asking, "Would it be strange if I stayed to listen anyway?" She hesitated too, but nodded. "Not strange at all." She sat at the piano, feeling his quiet presence behind her. When she began to play, the music filled the room with something fragile, sadness turning into warmth. She didn't know why she chose that song. It was one Daniel used to love, a melody that always made her cry. But this time, she didn't cry. When she finished, the silence was heavy but gentle. Evan spoke first. That sounded like someone saying goodbye. Claire's throat tightened. Maybe it was. Evan walked to the piano, stopping a few feet away. "I lost someone too," he said quietly. 3 years ago? My wife." The words hung between them, heavy but familiar. Claire met his eyes and saw it, the same kind of loss that had followed her for years. And just like that, 2 strangers were no longer strangers. That night, something shifted. When he left, she said softly, "Drive safe." He paused at the door, then smiled. "Play again tomorrow. I think it helps." And he was right. Days passed and the lessons continued. Emily returned, healthy and cheerful, unaware of the silent connection that had formed between her father and her teacher. They didn't flirt, didn't cross any lines. It wasn't like that. It was deeper, quieter, a bond between 2 people learning how to breathe again. One afternoon, after Emily's lesson, Evan stayed to help Claire fix a broken curtain rod. It was such a simple thing, yet the moment felt strangely intimate. His hands were steady as he worked.
Okay.
And Claire found herself watching him. The concentration in his face, the calmness in his movements. When he caught her looking, she quickly turned away. "Sorry," she murmured. He chuckled. You don't have to be." Later, as he left, she caught herself saying, "Don't stop coming." She said it without thinking, almost a whisper. He looked back, smiling softly. "I won't." After that day, his presence became part of her life, a steady rhythm like the ticking of a clock or the hum of rain. He'd bring coffee some mornings, sometimes flowers, never anything too much. They talked about music, architecture, and memories they didn't share with anyone else. For Claire, it was terrifying, the idea that she might be feeling something again. She would sit by her window at night, thinking of Daniel and feeling guilty for even smiling at another man. But then she remembered what Daniel used to say: "Don't let life stop because I'm gone." One evening, when Evan came to pick up Emily, it started to rain. Heavy, cold rain that blurred the windows. Emily ran ahead to the car, and Claire handed Evan an umbrella. "You'll get soaked," she said. He smiled. "I've been through worse." Something in the way he said it made her heart ache. He wasn't just talking about the weather. That night, Claire sat at the piano again. She played the same song she'd played the first night he stayed, but this time she wasn't playing for Daniel. She was playing for herself. For the woman who was still learning to live. As the notes faded, she realized she wasn't alone. Evan stood by the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes fixed on her. "I knocked," he said softly, "but you didn't hear." She stood, startled but not frightened. "What are you doing here?" "I forgot something," he said, though they both knew he hadn't. He took a step closer. "I didn't want the music to stop." Claire's heart pounded. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in years, she saw not the shadow of loss, but the possibility of life beyond it. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "You said don't stop coming," he whispered. Her voice trembled. "And you didn't." He shook his head. "I don't think I could, even if I tried." For a moment, the world felt still. Two souls caught between grief and hope, both afraid to break the fragile silence. Then Claire said something that even surprised her. "Promise me you won't stop." Evan looked at her, and there was no hesitation. "I promise." When he left that night, she didn't feel the usual emptiness that followed goodbyes. Instead, she felt something new, a quiet pulse of warmth, a spark of something that hadn't existed in her world for a long time. The next morning, she found herself smiling for no reason. She made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, even though she was alone. She knew what it meant. She was letting herself feel again, for the first time since Daniel's death. Claire Weston looked out at the morning sunlight and didn't feel the pain of yesterday. She felt the promise of tomorrow, but deep down, she also knew that love, especially love after loss, never came without its tests. And though she didn't know it yet, the promise she asked Evan to make would soon be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. For now, though, the music continued, and so did they. Summer came early that year. Portland was brighter than usual, full of green trees and warm wind that made everything seem alive. Claire Weston felt that change too, for the first time in years. Her days didn't begin with emptiness. Evan Carter had quietly become part of her routine. Some mornings, he brought her coffee from the cafe down the street. Sometimes he stayed after Emily's piano lessons, helping fix things around the studio or just listening as Claire played. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words always landed softly, like a melody she didn't know she needed. Their friendship had become something delicate, unspoken, but deeply felt. They didn't call it love. Neither wanted to rush or even name it. But it was there in the small glances, in the laughter that filled the silence, and in the way they both started to look forward to each other's company more than either cared to admit. One Saturday, Evan showed up without Emily. "She's spending the weekend with her grandparents," he explained. "I thought I'd bring you lunch." "You forget to eat when you teach." Claire laughed, pretending not to blush. "You make it sound like you're keeping track." "Maybe I am," he said quietly. They ate together at the small round table in the corner of her studio. The food wasn't anything fancy, sandwiches and soup, but it felt special. When they finished, Claire began playing the piano again. Evan listened in silence, his hands folded, his eyes soft. After a while, he said, "You play like someone who's learned how to survive heartbreak." Claire's fingers paused on the keys. "Maybe that's because I have." He didn't press further, but in that quiet, something passed between them, a silent truth neither needed to say out loud. They were both survivors, both rebuilding from loss. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew. They started meeting outside the studio, at the farmer's market, at the park, sometimes just walking by the river and talking about life. Evan told her stories about his late wife, about how she used to hum while she cooked. Claire shared memories of Daniel, how he used to make her laugh by pretending to play the piano terribly off-key. Those memories didn't hurt as much now. Somehow, talking about them with Evan made them softer. Then one evening, everything changed. It was late, and thunder rolled in the distance. Emily's lesson had ended early, but Evan stayed behind to help Claire close up the studio. The storm broke suddenly, pouring rain against the windows. Claire laughed, standing by the glass. "Looks like we're stuck." Evan joined her. "Not the worst place to be stuck," he said. There was something in his tone, a warmth that made her heart flutter. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain drowned out the world outside. Claire turned toward him and saw it, the loneliness in his eyes, the same ache that had once belonged to her. "I don't know how you do it," she whispered. "After losing someone, I didn't think I'd ever be able to connect again." He looked at her. "Maybe we don't move on," he said. "Maybe we just move forward." That simple line stayed in her mind for days. But time, as it often does, brought change. Evan's architectural firm received an offer for a major project in Chicago. It was a big opportunity, something he had worked toward for years. When he told her, Claire tried to hide her disappointment. "That's incredible," she said, smiling tightly. He looked at her for a long moment. "It doesn't feel incredible." She forced a small laugh. "You'd be crazy to turn it down." "Maybe I'm already crazy," he said softly. She didn't answer. Neither did he. The silence between them was heavier than words could carry. That evening, after Emily left, Claire stayed late at the piano. The studio was empty except for the soft hum of the city outside. She played their song, the one he always asked her to play. Each note felt like goodbye. She didn't see Evan standing at the doorway until the song ended. "Claire," he said quietly, "I don't want to leave things like this." She turned toward him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then how should we leave them?" He stepped closer, hesitant but certain. "Promise me something," she said suddenly. "Promise me you won't stop calling, or writing, or thinking about this, whatever this is." Evan reached for her hand, his voice trembling. "I won't stop. I promise." And he meant it. But promises, even when meant, are hard to keep. A week later, he left for Chicago. The first few weeks he called often. They talked about everything, his work, her students, Emily's progress. Every night she'd wait for his call like she used to wait for Daniel's voice years ago. But slowly, life began pulling them in different directions. His calls became less frequent, his messages shorter. Claire told herself not to be foolish. People get busy. Time zones make it hard. Life moves on. But every night she sat at the piano, she heard his voice in her mind. "I won't stop." One morning she received a letter, handwritten with Evan's familiar handwriting. It said, "The days are long here. I miss the rain. I miss the quiet. And I miss you. More than I thought I would." She read that letter 100 times. It became her anchor. But as the months stretched on, the letters stopped coming too. The silence returned, heavy and painful. Like the years before he came into her life. One day, Emily showed up for her lesson alone. She looked older, more distant. Claire asked about her father, trying to sound casual. "He's busy," Emily said. "He's barely home. I think he's trying to figure things out." That night, Claire didn't play the piano. She couldn't. She sat in the dark staring at the keys, feeling foolish for believing that love could return without breaking something again. Still, she refused to be angry. Deep down, she knew Evan hadn't forgotten her. He was just lost the same way she had once been. But the waiting was painful. One evening, she went for a walk by the river where they used to go. The air was cool and the sun was setting over the water. Couples passed her, holding hands, laughing. She felt both alone and strangely hopeful. Love, she thought, isn't about holding someone close. It's about believing they'll come back when the time is right. When she returned home, she opened the piano and began to play again. Slowly, the music returned. It wasn't the same as before. It carried a trace of sorrow, but also strength. She realized that even though Evan was gone, he had given her something she didn't know. She needed a reason to feel alive again. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. Claire continued to teach, continued to live. But her heart stayed quietly loyal to a promise whispered under a rainstorm. I won't stop. One night in autumn, she sat by her window, watching the leaves fall. She thought about writing to him, but decided against it. If he wanted to find her, he would. Some things couldn't be forced. Then a soft knock came at her door. She froze. No one ever visited that late. When she opened it, no one was there. Only an envelope lying on the doormat, her name written in Evan's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. The first line made her heart stop. I haven't forgotten. I just didn't know how to come back. Tears blurred her vision. He was still there somewhere, thinking of her. She read it again and again until the ink smudged under her fingers. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that love doesn't vanish with distance. It waits. That night, she whispered into the darkness. I begged him not to stop. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't. The next morning, she smiled for the first time in months. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. Her story with Evan wasn't over. And though miles separated them, the connection remained strong, unseen. And alive. What she didn't know was that the universe was already bringing him back into her life in a way she could never have predicted. Their unfinished song was waiting to be played again. Autumn returned to Vermont with its familiar crisp air and red leaves painting the hills. It had been 6 months since Evan left for Chicago. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Margaret had filled her days with gardening, book clubs, and early morning walks. She smiled more easily now. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the windows, she would glance toward the porch, half expecting to see him fixing something, his sleeves rolled up, his quiet concentration steadying the whole world. But he was gone, living his own life, and that was how it was meant to be. One late afternoon, as Margaret sorted mail at the kitchen counter, she noticed an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Chicago postmark. Her heart gave a small, surprised beat. She opened it carefully. Dear Margaret, I hope the garden's still winning its fight against the frost. The city's busier than I imagined, but I'm doing well. I started working part-time at a museum and studying architecture. You were right, sometimes rebuilding begins when you least expect it. I wanted you to know that your words, your patience, and your stories still guide me here. I'm grateful. Evan. Margaret sat down slowly. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed those words. She smiled, folded the letter neatly, and placed it in her old music box, the same one that once held her wedding ring, that night. She stepped outside and looked at the stars. The wind was sharp, but peaceful. She whispered softly, He's doing fine. Weeks passed and more letters came, not often, just enough to fill the quiet. Evan wrote about classes, his small apartment, the people he met. He described the city lights and how they reminded him of the porch lantern they used to fix together. Margaret replied every few weeks, writing about her garden, the neighbors, and how the house had become her friend again. It wasn't romance. It was connection, pure and human. They both knew that some relationships were not meant to last forever, but still shaped everything that came after. One snowy morning, she received another letter, but this one was different. Margaret, I met someone. Her name is Claire. She's kind and she listens the way you do. I wanted you to know because I think you'd like her. I hope that's okay. Margaret read the words twice. A soft ache moved through her chest. But it wasn't sadness, it was peace. She smiled, closed the letter, and whispered, "Good for you, Evan." She went outside to brush snow off the porch railings, her breath misting in the cold. She looked up at the sky and felt something deep: pride, warmth, and gratitude that she had been part of someone's healing journey. That spring, Lily visited again. "You look happy, Mom," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "I am," Margaret replied. "Peaceful, finally." Lily glanced around the cozy kitchen. "You've done a lot with this place." "It helped me remember who I was," Margaret said with a smile. "For a long time, I thought life stopped when your heart breaks. But sometimes it just starts breathing differently." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "You sound like someone who's made peace with the past." "I think I have," Margaret said. Later, after Lily left, Margaret walked to the garden and knelt by the rose bushes Evan had helped her plant. New buds had begun to bloom. She touched one gently, thinking everything grows if you just give it time. Months rolled into a year. Evan's letters came less frequently, but that was natural. He was living fully now, chasing dreams and new beginnings. Margaret never felt abandoned. She felt fulfilled. On his birthday, she sent a simple postcard: "Keep growing. Evan, the world needs builders, not just of walls, but of hearts." 2 years later, she received a small parcel in the mail. Inside was a framed photograph, Evan standing beside a young woman with bright eyes and a calm smile. Behind them was a building site, scaffolding rising high. "We're engaged," the note read. "I wanted you to be the first to know. Thank you for believing in me when I see OULDN single quotes." But Margaret held the photo for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly. Tears gathered, but they were the kind that came with warmth, not sorrow. "He's found his future," she whispered that night. She placed the photograph on the shelf beside her family pictures, not out of longing, but pride. The following summer, Margaret received another letter, this time an invitation. "Claire and I are getting married in August. It would mean a lot if you came." She hesitated at first. Chicago was far, and her health wasn't what it used to be. But something inside urged her to go. She hadn't traveled in years, but this felt important. So one early morning, she packed a small suitcase, put on her best blue dress, and boarded a train bound west as the train rolled through fields and small towns. She gazed out the window, memories flooding back, laughter on the porch, the sound of rain, conversations that healed old wounds. By the time she reached Chicago, she felt ready for whatever waited. The wedding was simple and beautiful, held in a small garden surrounded by white roses. When Evan saw her among the guests, his face lit up. "Margaret," he said, rushing over to hug her. "You didn't think I'd miss it, did you?" She laughed. He grinned. "You came all this way. I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Claire, the bride, joined them with a warm smile. "You must be Margaret. Evans told me so much about you." Margaret smiled, her eyes kind. "I've heard beautiful things about you, too." As the ceremony began, Margaret sat quietly, watching as vows were exchanged under the golden light. She thought about all the chapters of her life, the love she'd lost, the pain she'd survived, and the peace she'd finally earned. When the couple kissed, she clapped softly, whispering, "He's home." After the reception, Evan found her sitting by a small fountain. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," she replied, "by living fully." He smiled, eyes shining. "I wouldn't be here without you." Margaret shook her head. "You would have found your way. I just gave you a little light when it got dark." He hesitated, then said, "I still keep the rose cutting. It's growing." She smiled. "Of course it is." Before leaving, Evan hugged her tightly. "You'll always have a place in my story," he said, "and you in mine." She replied softly. That evening, Margaret walked back to her hotel room alone. The city lights shimmered like stars brought to earth. She sat by the window, feeling both full and light. Life had come full circle. She had given love again, not the kind that binds, but the kind that frees. When she returned home to Vermont, she went straight to her garden. The roses were in bloom again, bright and full of life. She smiled, feeling the wind brush against her face, whispering something like gratitude. Margaret picked one rose, placed it in a small vase, and set it by the window beside Evan's wedding photo. She looked out at the sunset and whispered, "We all find our way, don't we?" Her heart, once heavy with memories, now felt open, peaceful. For the first time in years, she felt that every ending truly did hold a quiet beginning.